Welcome back. The build-up begins, and let's bring in our guest on the program. She is a journalist turned politician, former deputy governorship candidate in the Cross River State 2023 governorship election, and of course now national publicity secretary of the Cityboy movement. Emana Amawe, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Jeffrey. Good to see you.
You know, I was just trying to process my head.
as well.
Yeah, I tried to process in my head. I said, okay, on one hand, years ago, I was sitting side by side with Emana on News Track. Now, we're sitting on opposite side to talk politics. So it's good to see you after a very long
That's
time.
The evolution.
Yes, that's the evolution. So let's talk about Cityboy movement. So the conversation right now, if you look at just at the face value, people see this as Tinubu's movement to ensure his father's re-election. This is another political movement to re-engineer the youth to support the president. But these are things that we can deduce from what we see. But what exactly is the Cityboy movement really all about? Because from the Cityboy movement, there has been a lot of controversy recently by some of the appointed, I think it's the ambassadors now, I'm not sure of the designation that was given to certain persons across different states.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll start first by saying that the Cityboy movement is not about celebrity optics. It's not all just a political tool. Rather, it's a vehicle for nation building. Of course, the founder of the Cityboy movement is the son of the president, Barrister Tinubu. Yes, but it's beyond him as a person. It's about youth inclusion, mass mobilization, making the youth understand that their voice matters, their votes count. Then that translates to, of course, supporting the cause of the president's renewed hope agenda. But most importantly, it's telling the young people who have complained over time that they've not been carried along. It's been business as usual. The same old politicians recycle themselves. And rather than sitting on the sidelines to complain, or these days being keypad warriors, throw your hat in the ring, be an active mobilizer, and then support tangible reform for a better Nigeria. That's what the Cityboy movement is all about.
Interesting. I think you've given us a perspective. So let's project. We're going to come back to the premise you provided for us. So we can look back. So maybe do an assessment for us. The president had made certain promises in his renewed hope agenda. It is an 80-page document that we all were privy to as to the representation of young persons. So if you were to do an analytics of that representation as against what it is today, do you think the president has fulfilled this promise? Okay,
so I'll start by saying that since the inception of the Nigerian democracy in 1999, no other president has appointed as many young people into his cabinet. In some instances, not necessarily in the Federal Executive Council, but no other president has appointed this many young people into government offices. So yes, I'd say that there's room for improvement, of course, but the president has performed quite fairly in that regard.
So now that we're talking about the president's performance, because I think that's what you'll be selling to people, right? He's called the City Boy. So a lot of people want to hear, what has the City Boy exactly done for us? And I think for a lot of people, the most important thing will be security. And I wonder, how are you going to sell this president to communities that have been attacked? Take Waro community, for example, or the church in Benue State where 9 parishioners were kidnapped in that vigil, or the community also in Benue State where about 13 people were killed in the market. How are you going to sell Cityboy to them, particularly those in the hinterlands who don't really have that experience of city or the Cityboy?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is not unaware of the pressures the citizens face on a daily basis. It's a government that listens to feedback. But most importantly, we need to understand that Nigeria is in a reform, reset phase. Most of the distortions that we've seen in the system over time did not emanate from the government of President Tinubu. They've been systemic distortions in place over time. So the president is actively working. You know, we see with the 2026 appropriation bill that is currently before the National Assembly that a good percentage has been dedicated to defense. And definitely work is ongoing to ensure that Nigerians feel safe, because outside, most importantly, the citizens need to feel secure. But where there is insecurity, it affects investors' confidence as well, and ultimately dovetails into, you know, affecting our economy negatively. So definitely I'd say that the president is listening. While Nigerians demand change or expect change, what needs to be done is closing the timeline between implementation and the work that is ongoing.
And I imagine they will ask you, for how long more do we have to wait? Promises have been made time and again. And just yesterday, the president made yet another promise. And I know you've probably had to answer these questions, but these are the real issues that people are facing. So it's not like you're detached, because for a lot of people, they just see through it and say, well, we know you're trying to just get re-elected. But our lives is not about election or re-election. Our lives are at stake here, on the line in that sense. So how do you try to sell that in such a way that people believe you?
Okay, just as I said, there's been systemic distortion over time. Insecurity in Nigeria, you know, that we are facing as of today didn't just happen overnight. So 2.5 years, yes, we can argue it's been long enough time, but when you compare where we are coming from and where we are now, you'd actually realize that time and process has to happen. The thing is work being done? Yes. All government needs to do is ensure that, you know, security policies bordering around security of life and property and safety of citizens, you know, that moves beyond paperwork to actually trickling down to Nigerians in the streets and in their houses. We all walk the streets, we all live in our houses, and I can assure you that we all want to sleep with our eyes closed. And even the president, you know, cannot afford to act unaffected or be detached, because where insecurity is rife, I can assure you that no matter how high up there you think you are, at the end of the day, the Nigeria we have as it is today, well, one united entity, will be unsafe for every one of us, including Mr. President himself. So reform, reset phase. Reform is always painful, or can be painful, but most times necessary. The thing is, work is in progress. If work is not in progress, then it would be another narrative entirely. It would be a totally different kettle of fish.
You know, we're going to come back to the numbers in terms of macroeconomics and how it impacts the people. I want to go back to something the president said. So let's look at a bit of data. The last election, from the four bigs, I call them the big four, or three to four big candidates that contested in the last election, adding Robbie Okonkwo. So we're talking about the president got 8.7 million votes. The others got cumulatively, let's call it an approximate of 14 million votes. So if you want to look at the numbers, more people did not want him to be president, but he won the majority, at least as a single vote, and that doesn't invalidate his legitimacy. But he said, there are people that support the president like you and every other person within the Cityboy movement. But the president is also very hated in Nigeria. From his mouth to listening ears, he said it in Benue. He said, he hates me like hell. And so there's a question of love for the president, hate for the president, and belief in the president. What narrative exactly would the Cityboy movement be pushing to people to be able to support the president if he understands that he's being hated as much as he confessed that he's being hated?
Well, it's only normal that in life you cannot please everybody. You know, there's a popular saying that if you want everybody to be happy with you, perhaps you should be selling ice cream. You know, Mr. President is all about development, economic renewal, institutional strengthening, creating opportunities, which is also part of the vision of the Cityboy movement: impact awareness, mass mobilization, youth inclusion. while, of course, driving votes. So it's in as much as Mr. President, you know, the votes of the two candidates, the other candidates put together surpassed Mr. President's votes. Mr. President, you know, eventually got elected into office. Is he working towards reform? Yes. Reform is definitely uncomfortable. The challenge is the disconnect, or how informed the people at the grassroots are. Because sometimes when reform is in place, you know, one could think that it is more of an elitist thing. You know, numbers are being bandied around. How do macroeconomics translate to food on the table for the average Nigerian? So the Cityboy movement, while going about its mass mobilization, is taking time out to educate Nigerians on issues surrounding the reforms of the president, issues of fuel subsidy removal, where people will say, oh, we cannot buy fuel, the fuel prices have gone up. You know, Cityboy movement has a role to communicate to the last person at the ward level, at the grassroots, like that. As much as it seems, or, well, it appears that the cost of fuel has gone up, the fuel subsidy regime was a fiscally unsustainable system that benefited only a few people. Now, Mr. President has taken the fuel subsidy out. The thing is ensuring that the funds that are saved are channeled to social protection interventions, you know, things like transport support, food security, and infrastructure, which is what the president is working towards. So, of course, there's fuel subsidy removal. There's also stabilization of the forex regime. This is not just banding words about, it also has institutional validation, you know, from organizations like the World Bank, that Mr. President is doing a good job when it comes to reform, and eventually the average Nigerian will feel it.
I mean, you've spoken about the average Nigerian, but what about you and other members in the Cityboy movement? What's in it for you? Appointments?
Okay, so most people out there believe that the Cityboy movement is an elitist club or some kind of reward support group system. So you work for Mr. President so that eventually you can get some kind of reward. I'd like to tell you that any Nigerian who fits the cap and can get the job done deserves to get appointed into any position where they'd be able to serve and add value. However, for the Cityboy movement cuts across artisans, creatives, entrepreneurs, politicians like myself, and generally is open to every Nigerian. The thing is, it's not about, most of the people who are in the rank and file from the top to the bottom of the structure of the Cityboy movement are people who are well accomplished in their respective fields, successful businessmen, professionals who are reputable. So these are people who have first addresses, like myself. You know, I ran an election 2 years ago. I believe that I have an address, I have an occupation outside being a politician. So Cityboy movement is not about political jobbers seeking political appointments. If appointments come out of it eventually, the question you should be asking is, does the cap fit? Is it the right peg plugged in the right hole, or is it just a way of rewarding people for political participation? And I can assure you that's not what the Cityboy movement is all about.
All right, we just have about 30 seconds to go. The reason I asked the question I did ask, because there's a lot of psychological game and plays that will translate to maybe for or against all of this. That's why I talked about hatred and what I love, because if you're going to sell the agenda of the president and his plans and his reforms and structural resets, people need to believe first in the person that his intention is honorable for them in the long run. But I know you appreciate numbers and economics. So for what will it be in terms of alignment for people to begin to say, okay, maybe we're wrong about this particular move by the president? On one hand, is it prices moving to where it was, or wages increasing significantly to measure up with modern reality? Because I just asked the question that the average person is interested in.
Okay, so I'd like to say that, first of all, elections are not won by press conferences or on social media. Elections are won by performance weighed against results. The Cityboy movement exists to sell the agenda, the renewed hope of the agenda of Mr. President, and that is going to be through showing, telling the story that what you feel, is misalignment between government or a disconnect between government and the people is not as the story really is. The gap that exists, that is what the Cityboy movement is there to close. Bringing the citizens closer to government, giving a face to government, and showing the people at home that Mr. President is working. Mr. President is one person. He cannot do it all alone. It's building Nigeria is supposed to be partnership between the citizens and the president himself and his cabinet. So Cityboy movement is there to close the gap between the citizens and bring them closer to government, give government a face as well.
Thank you so much. More interesting days coming for us to have all of this engagement. These are just the very beginning. The hits will build to a crescendo when numbers will fly out and performances will be assessed and all of that. But it's good to see you. I see you as big sister now in politics. We'll be here to question all the actions as much as possible in the performance. Emana Mawe is a journalist as well as a deputy governorship candidate in the last governorship election in Cross River State, as well as the national publicity secretary of the Cityboy movement. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Kadi. Thank you, Jeffrey.